Yeah, to go back to that model of mental health first aid, like one part of it is often offering reassurance. And sometimes reassurance is you're not alone.
Like we said, mental health first aid, it is about recognizing when someone's encountering a mental health challenge or a mental health crisis. But it's also about giving the skills to sort of be a first responder, just like you would for CPR.
Welcome to the CFI Faculty Lounge Podcast, an outlet created for continuous learning and actionable insights for faculty. I'm your host, Eric Magrum, inviting you to join us in conversation with dedicated educators who share their experiences, challenges, and effective solutions. Today, I'm excited to welcome Dr. Joe Leblanc of Graduate Psychology and Karla Kale of the Counseling Center here at James Madison University. Welcome, Joe and Karla, and thank you for being here with us today.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Eric.
So imagine this. It's 10:15 on a Wednesday morning. Students are filing out after class, but Alex stays rooted in his seat. You notice his leg bouncing rapidly, nervously, nonstop. You walk over and say, "Hey, Alex, everything okay?" He looks up, and for a moment, it's like he's trying to hold himself together, but he can't. His voice cracks. "I can't do this anymore. I haven't slept in 2 days." He takes a shaky breath. "I've stopped going to my other classes. I can't focus. I can't eat. I don't even know why I'm here right now." His hands grip the desk. He looks terrified of his own thoughts, of burdening you, of losing control. He says quietly, "I feel like everything is falling apart. I don't feel safe being alone." Now your heart is pounding. This is just a student having a bad day. What do we do?
It's a great question, Eric, because I do feel like this is a situation that I imagine people listening are resonating with in some way, shape, or form. Like when I was listening, I was wondering, could this be a student that says all this in front of all the other students? Or is this the kind of interaction you have after class? There are so many different ways it can show up, and the answer is any and all of the above. So yeah, and we should say, Karla, right, what we do here at JMU and what we're very involved in is for helping faculty and staff with situations like this. And that's through mental health first aid training, which the whole purpose is to provide the skills to really address with students, but also with each other, with the adults, the other adults working on campus. How do we help someone be that first point of contact with what could be a mental health challenge, or more of what I'm seeing in this situation, which we might classify as a mental health crisis.
So challenge versus crisis. And I really appreciate the idea that this isn't just about students. You could easily have a colleague. In fact, it might be more probable that you have a colleague come into your office, or maybe you stumble into their office, say, "Hey, I got a quick, oh, hey, what's going on?"
Yeah.
And then that unfolds. But back to the challenge versus crisis, can you talk, how would the listener, how would I understand the difference? And then how do I know what to do from there?
Yeah. I think with mental health first aid, it's really helpful that they kind of break things down in early signs and symptoms, worsening signs and symptoms, and then getting into kind of that crisis piece. So things like noticing changes in behavior, noticing changes in appearance, noticing changes in mood, all of those can be kind of those early warning signs that we can notice in students and in our fellow faculty and staff. Just recognizing when those changes come up versus, I think, the scenario with Alex, he's seems like he's in acute distress.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I know the thing that really jumped out to me is what was it? "I don't even want to be here anymore."
Yeah. Yes.
That's a huge red flag for me. That's one where I would probably want to ask about thoughts of suicide because we want to, assess what kind of crisis are we looking at and how quickly do we need to get you connected to professional support.
So am I right to say that if this were to happen, first, my first inkling is, oh no, I don't want to say thoughts of harm or suicide, but then I'm like, but then can I leave this student alone? And so I'm like, okay, this has got to be a warm handoff to the counseling center in my mind. That's where immediately where I go. Is that the right idea? Or maybe there were some other steps I need to take?
I mean, I think definitely a warm handoff to the counseling center. I think you can, in that moment, I feel like even reading this, when you sent it over, just the scenario, I got chills reading this. And, Joe and I teach mental health first aid, and it still gave my heart a little flutter. So I think just acknowledging that we always have that kind of visceral response when we're put in this sort of situation, and then being able to take a breath, slow down, and just tell Alex, hey, I'm here with you. We can figure this out together. Tell me a little bit more about what's going on. And that can sort of be a guiding point to start from. I don't know what you think, Joe.
No, it is startling, and it would make sense that this would really, I can imagine someone saying, well, I would just freeze. I wouldn't know how to respond. And I also think in this work that we've done now for several iterations of trainings with faculty and staff across campus, one thing I've noticed is, and I train counselors for a living, so is the worry that I'm going to say something wrong. So it is very tempting because of that feeling to then say, well, I'm going to avoid this altogether, or I'm going to maybe rush to an action before. I think the key operative word, and we'll probably cover the model in some sense in a minute here, but the big word in the middle of the model is assess.
Okay.
And getting a sense of what's going on. Is this a challenge, which might be an early warning sign, or like I notice that you're showing up to class late. Like one thing, and it's rooted in an observation. Your assessment could be, we'll talk about the model, ALGEE. But when we see all of these things in succession and then getting to that line of, I don't feel safe being alone. We're kind of going through a training like this. It helps you slow down a little bit to assess and to consider we might be dealing with a crisis here. And the outcome will probably be to have a warm handoff to the counseling center. What we hope to provide and give skill in is, okay, how do I get to that point?
And I think that's where the mental health first aid training obviously comes in. But I want to say something, because you hit the nail on the head when it said, I don't want to say the wrong thing. Because as Karla, you were talking about suicide, and I immediately, I just went more alert because I was like, oh no, I'm going to say the wrong thing. And then you just said that's what most people are afraid of. And that was as you said it, I was like, oh no. So it almost seems like the probability of you saying the wrong thing is much less than you not doing anything. Or what is worse? It would be not doing anything.
Yeah. Actually, I often show folks a really great video. It's a Brené Brown video on empathy. And my favorite thing about the video is her example of empathy is someone saying, I don't even know what to say right now. I'm just so glad you told me. And I love that phrase, because acknowledging the fact that we don't know what to say in that moment can be incredibly reassuring, because it's not necessarily, like she talks about how empathy is not what you say, it's about connection. So if I'm able to connect with that individual and be with them in that moment when they need somebody, that's really what's going to help more than whatever words I might put out there. Like, we can go through what's more helpful or less helpful, but it's really about how can I connect to this individual in their moment of need.
I really appreciate that. I love Brené Brown and her work, particularly her work on vulnerability and that whole sphere. Really important work. But I also really enjoy the idea, hey, I'm not even really sure what to say right now, but I'm here and I care, and I'm going to sit here with you.
Yeah. Literally just those 3, 4, I guess, if you are not alone. But that's sometimes all you need, just to, again, bring that tension down and just slow the moment down so that we can really dig into what would be the most helpful resource. Because when someone is in distress, often connecting them to resources is what we want to do. So you're that place where the moment can settle and figure out what's our next step together. Yeah.
I want to ask maybe a clarifying question. So when we say connect to resources, that usually means a warm handoff to another connecting person, meaning we connect with that person in real time, and we don't say, hey, go call the counseling center. We legitimately walk them over there so that they can literally have a warm connection handoff. I'll call it the warm connection handoff. Is that the proper protocol?
I think depending on the situation, like Alex's situation, the level of distress that we heard in that scenario, I would say definitely walking over to the counseling center feels appropriate to me.
Okay.
I think we're lucky that the resources for students, we also have Madison Cares.
Okay.
And sometimes, like, I've sat in my office and filled out a Madison Cares report with the student to say, hey, we see that you need a little bit more support. We're not sure what that support's going to look like, but we've identified maybe it's more academic, it's less emotional. So let's just reach out to Dean of Students and see what we're able to connect you with. So it's not necessarily that it always has to be the counseling center, but really talking with a student, figuring out where is the source of stress, and then kind of going from there.
Yeah. So I want to use Alex's story, but I also want to help listeners understand what is mental health first aid and what does it teach?
Yeah. So, like we said, mental health first aid, it is about recognizing when someone's encountering a mental health challenge or a mental health crisis, but it's also about giving the skills to sort of be a first responder, just like you would for CPR. In fact, that's the training website will kind of make that parallel pretty apparent, that just like you'd want to, know the ins and outs of CPR, this is kind of in a parallel skill set in terms of mental health challenge or crisis. So we've alluded to the model here, and I'll just review it real quick. And we've already kind of said some specific parts. The first step is approach and considering how you're going to engage the person you want to have this kind of conversation with. In the case of Alex, is it best in the middle of a class? So this kind of observation comment that starts this, kind of considering the setting, would it be better in a private place? Would it be better to schedule it? Knowing that you kind of have control of setting up those conditions that might prove for a better outcome. The second is listening non-judgmentally, which we can talk more about. Karla mentioned the third, which is give reassurance. And then the last two are the E's, which is encouraging kind of the professional help and then encouraging self-help, or I'll add community help. So there you get ALGEE. ALGEE, ALGEE. So we have approach, listen, give reassurance.
Thank you. Encourage professional help and encourage self-help or self-reflection.
Yeah. Self-help, yeah. And within the center of that model is also the assess piece.
Right.
So throughout all of that, you're continually assessing to sort of see, how is my approach landing? I listened, and then I'm going to give reassurance. I'm going to assess, how did that reassurance land?
Okay.
If it didn't land well, let's go back to listening. So it's not necessarily a linear model, which I think is really important. You can kind of bounce through different parts of that model. And the reality is that you might only get to approach, and somebody might not be ready to talk. In which case, that approach is still really important because you've identified yourself as somebody who cares and who's interested, so that potentially when they are ready to reach out for help, you might be somebody they can identify.
Got it. So I love the acronym ALGEE. So we talked about what it teaches, and even for listeners that aren't familiar at all. So Mental Health First Aid is a program offered by, or you both offer the program, correct?
Yes, we're trainers.
Trainers, so that trainers for mental health first aid, and that's offered through the CFI, correct?
Correct. In partnership with the counseling center. And actually, one thing we've noticed is there are likely a lot of other entities on campus that are starting to offer it.
Oh, okay.
Karla, you could probably speak to even people within the counseling center who are now trained. It started with just the two of us back in 2022, 23, somewhere in there is when I got trained. And then it's kind of starting to grow, I think.
Slowly but surely, yeah. We've been lucky enough to have one of our graduate assistants in the counseling center has gone through the Train the Trainer for this. But I guess we should clarify, it is a model that's used around the world.
Okay.
So it's been around for 20 plus years, I think. So it's a well-established sort of evidence-based approach that Joe and I were lucky enough to get training in so that we're then able to offer these classes. But we're definitely not the only people doing it. There's other groups in Harrisonburg. You can kind of find virtual trainings that are offered across the United States.
Yeah. So a really good parallel to your point, Joe, would be CPR. Like this is parallel to the American Red Cross or the American Heart Association, et cetera, offering CPR.
Exactly.
Got it.
Yeah. And I really appreciate that because one of the sort of resistances that I often run into with this is when I talk about mental health first aid, people are like, oh, but I'm not a clinician. And it's, if I took CPR, that doesn't make me a doctor. So it really is helping you to, sustain somebody, to help somebody, getting them connected to those professional resources, just like CPR or first aid is going to help you get someone connected to a doctor.
Yeah, and I think you don't realize the importance of CPR until the skill set is needed right now, and you have you don't have it, let's say, and you're sitting there helpless, or feelings of helplessness rather. I truly appreciate these skills because I've been thrust into positions with students where, oh no, and thankfully, I've somehow found my way to the counseling center in situations where I was like, after it happens, I'm like, what just happened? And thank the Lord I was able to guide them in the somewhat right direction. Yeah. So I did one thing right, which is walk them over to the counseling center and realize I don't know what I'm doing, and I know they're going to know what to do. So I want to come back to Alex and why mental health first aid is so important. Why this skill set, just like CPR, is super important right now.
I'll add, too, that I really think there are probably people listening, or I would assume, that kind of consider themselves, well, I have this really empathetic person in my life who's really good at this kind of stuff. I'm not that person. Therefore, maybe I'm not the best person for that. And we do talk in the training about how we may not be the best person for the moment, but I kind of see it, and that's what I like about making it accessible, a framework that anyone can employ, and really making that just accessible to everyone at a really basic level, so that, because you might be that best person, and you might see Alex in your class, and you might not feel that sense of efficacy, but you can, I think this case feels real in a sense, like I could see that happening for everybody. So I just wanted to start there to say, like, this, you do not need to have natural skill sets or charisma or any of those kind of characteristics. I do think the beauty of it is emphasis on skills and what sort of like framework and specific, what's helpful. We talk a lot about this, what's helpful and what's not, and how we can really change some minds around, how they might talk to someone about this.
Right. So it's not you trying to become a fully blown clinician.
No,
this is
definitely not.
This is giving you the framework to have 30 seconds of just like, okay, I can help this student and ease their tension so that I can then hand them off to somebody who has more training. So leveling up my very, very low level of skill just enough to help that student in those moments of need.
Exactly. It's so that when you have that moment of, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do. Oh, wait, I took mental health first aid, I do have some idea of what to do. So it really is to help decrease your anxiety when you're faced with situations like this. So to kind of go to your question, Eric, around why now, I think we've all seen the news articles probably for the last 15 years about the mental health crisis in college. The counseling center directors, looking at the data that they collect from them, every year they've talked about how the mental health is more alarming on campus and the levels of crisis are higher. And it's not that they're higher from 10 years ago, it's that each year they're higher than they were the year before. So I know our director in the counseling center often talks about how at this point we can't even really call it a crisis anymore, because a crisis by definition is a temporary deviation from normal. And after 15 years, it really is sort of our new normal, which is an unfortunate sort of realization and something that I think we do have to acknowledge and figure out, okay, if this is the new normal, what skills are going to be beneficial, what is going to help us manage this new normal rather than kind of hoping for it to go back to the way it was 15 years ago.
Right, so tooling ourselves for the moment.
Exactly.
So the 5 key actions, those would be the ALGEE. Is that correct, or did I jump?
You got it.
No,
Okay.
you got it.
So let's go real quick. So ALGEE: approach, listen,
Give reassurance.
give reassurance,
You're doing a good job.
encourage professional reach or outreach, if you will,
Yes.
and encourage self-help.
You got it.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's go to the stigma. And
That's been sitting with me.
yeah, the stigma around mental health crises, or in this case, just what is. Can we talk about the stigma and then perhaps even discrimination when it comes to these sort of services, these sort of trainings, et cetera?
Well, I was even thinking about the stigma of suicide. So in this instance, kind of getting back to another question about what would we do here, one of the first things that came into my mind was the myths about suicide. And there's this idea that if I say the wrong thing, that will somehow encourage the person towards suicide. And there's really a lot of research and data on that not being the case. There's also research and data on kind of, we like to think of, what are the demographics of the person who's most likely, or what is the situation? And really the answer is anyone. We really limit our capacity to respond when we try to just assume that this is only a phenomenon that a specific type of person can experience. So you see there where stigma and mythology come into play and can, in the case like this, really impact your response. So I'm not sure if that's where you wanted to go.
No, that's exactly where we went, and that's fine. Yeah. So there's this general idea that I'm making this up and being dramatic about it. Only people with I have a blue shirt on, so only people with blue shirts on have these feelings. So if somebody in a red shirt comes in, that's not going to happen. Is that sort of the idea?
Yeah, only people with clinical depression or people who have been to, experience psychiatric services of some sort are, and it's just it's mythology.
Yeah.
Yeah, recognizing the prevalence of mental health concerns. I think, many folks throughout their lives, regardless of their demographics, can face a mental health challenge. And another big piece of this model is that recovery is possible. So a large part of the training talks through, what am I looking for? So destigmatizing it and helping us notice those maybe subtler signs that can help us intercede and intervene and offer support earlier so that we can hopefully prevent it ever coming to that crisis point. Because the earlier we're able to get support to somebody, the easier recovery is as well.
So what might early intercedence intervention, what might that look like? So if I saw Alex, maybe I saw Alex a week ago, and this is on Tuesday. Last Tuesday I saw Alex and he looked not like Alex normally looks, meaning They normally have their hair done or whatnot, and they didn't have their hair done. And they normally have their shirt tucked in, they didn't have their shirt tucked in. All those little silly things that I noticed. What would that look like? Or what would that sound like? What would that be like for me to have an early sort of intervention?
Well, that's the case in point of it's all about your observations and observations of changes in appearance, behavior, cognition, affect. Like, what are you seeing that's different? What are you seeing that's kind of elevating your senses to, Alex is showing up a little differently today. Maybe not in the same way with the shaking leg and the comments that we had in the intro, but I sense something different. And those kind of observations, the I notice, I see, I hear, those comments we workshop that a lot in the training and through the steps, because those kind of responses can really elicit trust, non-judgment, but they're also factual because they're your observations and as you see something in front of you. So a certain set of, and especially around change, the idea is the change in behavior. So you may have a student that shows up late to every class. So them showing up late is not really a change. However, if Alex shows up late to class and that piques your interest, that's a change. So to say something like, I noticed you were late to class today, or I noticed you've been late to the last few classes, that's a change where we're kind of recognizing possible signs and symptoms of something. And it's that non-judgmental listening to how the student, or quite frankly, the adult, because this is mental health first aid for adults. So really,
right.
Most people on campus, a lot of people in our lives, really we can listen and attune to more what is going on here if they're ready.
Yeah. And I think being able to offer those observations and ask sort of those open-ended questions, like, can you tell me what's going on? Or because so frequently we say, hey, are you okay? And then the automatic response is, yeah, of course. Like I often teach that, like, are you okay is the equivalent of hi in our society in a lot of ways.
So true.
So if we can try and say, hey, I've noticed A, I've noticed B, I've noticed C, and I just want to check in. How are things? It elicits a little bit more investment in the conversation. It requires a little bit more conversation, hopefully, than, no, I'm good.
Can we teach people to attune to the atypical?
That's a great question. I mean, we definitely talk through a lot of the typical warning signs, but I think a big part of it is trusting your gut. And if you feel like you're noticing something and it's bringing up that little red flag in the back of your mind, then we want you to be able to approach. That first step in the model is, how do you approach when you notice those little things? And I really like what Joe was saying about, this is for adults, because I think particularly those early warning signs, you're almost more likely to notice those with your family, your friends, your coworkers, maybe even than a student. Because if you have a class of 100 students and you only see them, say, once a week, you might not be as attuned to those changes. So the earlier signs can be a little trickier to see in people that you don't know. But definitely, I'm sure, folks listening have people in their lives that, they might be worried about. And how can they approach those folks and really check in and say, this is what I'm noticing. Can you tell me what's going on?
Yeah. So I think I'm going to offer a comment or a retort that I could hear a listener having, which is like, listen, I have this PowerPoint that I'm supposed to get through, and we have these assignments, and you're asking me to watch these anywhere between, let's call it 18 to 25-ish year olds, and pick out the atypical. I feel like that's going to be hard. That's going to be hard for me to, and I personally do this, but I'm playing into the retort. What would the answer, the response be to that sort of a retort?
I mean, hypotheticals are always challenging to
Yes,
address,
of
right?
course.
I would say in a lot of ways that goes into the stigma and sort of it not being my job to look after my fellow humans. So I think just recognizing that it's not a test and it's not something that you need to be on guard for all the time. It's about just having this awareness and this knowledge that mental health challenges happen. And, folks in your life, students in your class are facing things that we know nothing about. So it is really listening to your instincts and recognizing, like, if something feels off, don't ignore it.
Yeah.
Address it. You don't necessarily have to go looking for something like, oh, they wore a blue shirt instead of a red shirt. I'm worried about that. It's, you're probably picking up on a lot of these things already, and it's just listening to your own intuition.
And we again don't want to get lost in the right or wrong of what is the right approach, what is the wrong approach. I could see a faculty member going through a presentation, seeing a student like Alex, maybe having some, that's interesting, that's different, okay, and moving on.
Yeah.
Maybe even going through some of those internal questions of, am I the right person? Do I really want to do this? Do I have capacity to do this? But then later recognizing this is still sitting with me. I think that's the beauty of the fact that it persists and there's still some follow through in wanting to act. Filling out that Madison Cares. That's an action. We have a lot of resources. Students have a lot of access to a lot of resources for mental health on campus. So part of the training would and I imagine we have people that leave the training with all sorts of ideas of how they want to use it. But at the very least, they're aware of what those resources are and knowing that I don't have to necessarily do this alone either. And I can engage with it in any way. But I think, and this gets to a bigger outcome because we want this, I think having these skills and the one-to-one impact you can have, and maybe in this case, saving a life. But I also like to think big picture for a second. And if we have people who feel more skilled or are more attuned to thinking about how can I care for someone else across from me, I just feel like that's a piece of creating more a community of care.
I couldn't agree more. And I think it empowers faculty. I also think a situation where somebody is leveled up or tooled for these sort of situations. If I have a professor who says, "Hey, Eric, you just don't quite seem yourself today. Anything you want to chat about? I'm here if not, but I'm here." I think that would go a long way. I think for me personally, I'd be like, "Oh, wow, that guy realized something."
Being seen is a powerful thing.
Yeah. And do we have any evidence that those small little actions prevent? And maybe I'm asking you to fabricate something that's not there. But do we have any, I don't even know if that could be a thing, but I feel like it would be logical that those things would steer folks away from things because, oh no, this person cares.
Isolation is a huge risk factor, and there's a lot of evidence behind that. So I think any moments where we can decrease isolation and make people feel seen and heard and feel like someone else cares are definitely protective factors.
And isolation might be an experience that a faculty member has, feeling isolated and feeling siloed. It is something that's in the burnout literature, and that is definitely challenging for our own well-being as faculty, right? So I think that plays a part in it too.
Yeah.
So I think your kind of anecdote resonates tremendously in terms of how would a fellow faculty, even in very simple, straightforward ways, show that moment of care and connection. Because it's the connection, it's the community, the compassion for self and others, all those sorts of things that I think address and can possibly go a long way for helping someone feel differently about their job and feel less isolated.
the quote that my mentor, I come from a coaching background, and he always talks about how the kids don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Mm-hmm. And I think this allows us, this potentially would level us up or tool us for more care, more connection, which leads to, it seems like, the lesser isolation, which isolation predictive factors for worse things. So if anything, it's a protective mechanism for those things. But on the positive side, that's obviously a positive side. But even on a faculty to faculty, like, you knock on somebody's door, hey, just haven't seen you in a little bit. Just want to see how so-and-so's doing, or how your classes are going, or I saw you in the hallway, or I saw you teaching, I saw you excited, or what. Just want to say, hey, I think that's a reason to come back to work. That's a reason to want to come back to work. I mean, because ultimately I think what gives work meaning is the connection, as opposed to, I just love this material and I want to talk about the material. We want to help people understand the material, and that's part of our job. But we have to connect with those people around us, or at least that's my idea of a good work environment, or a caring work environment.
Yeah. And I would extend that to someone who would help someone like Alex, or even a less acute situation. And one thing we talk a lot about in mental health first aid, and we try to do it a lot through the training, because it's the last module in the training, a very long training, is self-care for you, the mental health first aider, and what that looks like. Because this idea of fatigue, or I think someone might say, I'm not the right person, again, the capacity element that we as faculty can really hone in on, and I think really valid ways. Having that resource, that outlet of self-care, and having that as a clear idea is hugely important to engage in this kind of conversation.
Yeah, and I think, linking self-care and community, it's so easy for us to get caught up in how busy we are. Like, every faculty member I've ever spoken to wears like 6 hats or more. And often I find, and this is what I talk about when I talk about self-care with students too, is we don't do the things we most need when we most need them. So I'll, tell myself I don't have time to go check on my colleague because I have, ABC that I have to do. When really that 5-minute break, that 5-minute conversation is going to recharge me in a way that will help me get through the A, B, and C that I have to do. So thinking how we can be intentional about self-care in usually when we feel like we don't have time for it, that's when we need it the most.
So speaking of leveling up self-care, where can listeners learn more about mental health first aid, and perhaps even sign up for the next training?
Okay. So there's still time to register. April 17th.
Okay.
Through the CFI, we're offering a training. And there's regularly talent development. We'll offer a training for faculty and staff that we engage in once a year. I imagine if interest grew tremendously, or, through any, we're always open. And I think that's part of what we're seeing is the growth of the this training and people's appetite for it. So there's that avenue. And then there's probably new avenues, again, through its growth that could very well appear.
Yeah, the Mental Health First Aid website. So if you just Google Mental Health First Aid, you can see the different trainings that are being offered in the area. You can see virtual trainings that are being offered if you can't attend in person. So the virtual offerings, they're being offered across the United States, so you can attend one as long as the time difference works for you. And I think both Joe and I are really hoping for this program to continue to grow. So I would say, reach out to either of us individually, and we can talk and see what we have capacity for to offer outside of what CFI and talent development are already offering.
It's sort of 2 parts. There's an asynchronous online beforehand for the in-house one, and then there's a 7-ish hours in person. Is that correct?
You got it. That's the modality we choose. The asynchronous content will cover a lot of, depression, anxiety, like the signs and symptoms. One thing we emphasize in the training is that again, it is not train you to be a clinician, so thus the diagnosing kind of thing is not a primary concern of ours.
We do not diagnose.
We do not diagnose. We
First
repeat that over and over
aiders.
again. So that's what the 2-hour module will cover, and then we'll build on that content into the actual training of the skills in person. And we feel like the in-person part is valuable to have in person.
It is offered in multiple modalities, though. So for some folks, if they
Right.
wanted it to be fully in person and avoid that asynchronous module, that is offered. Not by Joe and I, but other trainers will do it that way. And there's also fully virtual models, either with or without the asynchronous. So it definitely tries to accommodate many different learning styles.
Good point.
Yeah, I can only imagine how in the situations I've come across with my students that had I had this framework, I would have been a little bit more confident in going through that. So I think I've not taken the training. I would like to take the training. However, I think I would have felt more confident had I had that framework. And it's one of the things that when I took CPR, particularly as a younger coach, I was always like, wait, we got to do this and then 30 and 2 and so is it 60 and 2 and finally the instructor just said, hey, if you just pound on their chest, blood is going to move around their body. I was like, got it. And I just needed a simple thing. And it sounds like that simple thing that you're talking about is if you realize somebody's in a situation, connect.
Yeah.
That's a great point, Eric. Yeah. And we
love
do
that.
have those conversations in our trainings. We try to really make it for the group and, kind of bring our experiences into it. And hope really for light bulb moments like that, because we do want people to actually use this. And it is challenging work, but it can be life-changing or life-saving.
And just that fear that I think everyone has of, I will say the wrong thing. And how can we acknowledge that fear and recognize that if I do say the wrong thing, I can recover from that. Like, it's not necessarily the be all end all. I can, that listening non-judgmentally step is really also that assessing piece of how did what I say land? And if it didn't land right, just acknowledging like, hey, I don't think that came across the way I wanted it to. Can I try that again? And that's a completely authentic and genuine way to connect with somebody who might be struggling. So definitely trying to decrease that fear that a lot of folks have.
So self-care, speaking of self-care and caring for the carers, we're going to switch gears to faculty well-being. As professionals, what does it look like to be a part of a caring university? What are the sort of the things that are involved there?
I'll do a shameless plug. Mental health first aid is for faculty too. Right? It's not just for students.
No,
it's
absolutely.
for how we can care for each other. But that's my glib response.
Well, and which connects to what Karla just said, is the first thing that comes to mind is how do we listen to each other non-judgmentally? How can I hold space for someone's experience and really not gravitate, especially if I'm an associate professor, I've been here 6 years, I'm not leaning into my experience or going into mentoring or advice-giving mode when that may not be what the person's really asking for. So how can I attune to really just listen and to hear the person's experience and just be present? Because there are certainly things we experience outside of our control in any job.
Yeah.
And just not knowing exactly, especially not knowing the context or what faculty we might be talking to, but we just never know what someone is experiencing in the totality of their experience. So I feel like that listening non-judgmentally was the first thing to come to us so we can really hear about, is this, some of the buzzwords in faculty well-being or, the invisible workload, compassion fatigue, burnout. We can really listen and kind of use the model to assess like what's going on here and what can I do to be helpful.
What is listening non-judgmentally like?
The question we ask in the training, maybe it's a good question for you, Eric, is how do you know someone's listening to you? What's helpful and what's not helpful for you, the podcaster?
Wow. I think I'm a big eye contact. So when I see somebody making eye contact, when I see usually nonverbal, so if you're nodding, you're, oh wow, or just kind of being there and being fully present, and there's no phone. Mm-hmm. That's a huge one. For example, if I was speaking and I was giving you, unburdening myself, and all of a sudden you check your phone, I'm immediately like, oh man. Like, again, I guess fully, like even your posture, like where your posture is, like, are you turned away from me? Are you kind of doing one of these? And for listeners, I'm turning my shoulders away, or am I orientated towards you? All these nonverbals, et cetera. That's I guess that's what would mean to me, and perhaps not giving me a solution, allowing me, and maybe you say, yeah, wow, that does suck.
Yeah.
Validate.
Yeah. I'm going to give another video that I love to show. There's a video called It's Not About the Nail that I would recommend your listeners Google. It's like a minute and a half, but it's about curbing that fixing reflex that so many of us have. And then what I would add on to that, Eric, is like that's a lot of the conversation that we have around those sort of active listening skills, those things that we look for. And then that non-judgmental piece comes in when we start talking about like cultural differences. So something like eye contact. Eye contact isn't comfortable for everyone. Mm-hmm. Like our neurodiverse folks might really struggle with eye contact, or in some cultures, particularly if you're talking about a professor and a student, really direct eye contact is considered rude or improper. So thinking through what I respond to well to know that someone's listening, and also recognizing what differences might be out there, what other important things do I need to consider, where I really want to meet the individual where they're at and not kind of placing my expectations onto them. And that comes in with stigma too. Like we talk about how culture is, it can be broad, like country of origin or ethnic origin. It can also be your family of origin. So it might be like a really small microcosm of culture. And not everyone's family of origin is supportive of mental health. So when you're thinking through like encouraging professional help, the E in ALGEE, you might meet a lot of resistance if you suggest the counseling center. And if I'm listening non-judgmentally, I'll hear that and pivot and say, okay, well, what about your doctor? Like, is there less resistance if we're talking about a medical provider than if we're talking about a mental health provider? So that listening non-judgmentally kind of permeates, like, I'm hearing what you're telling me, and I'm going to shift my approach to meet you where you're at.
Yeah, I think that's really important. That's something I've become aware of recently, because I just thought eye contact was universally like, this is a thing. And if we're not making eye contact, and then I realize that, oh no, that might be more of a me thing.
It's very North American.
Yeah. And that might not be for everybody. So that's something I've thought about, and trying to meet them where they are. So Joe, you said something earlier, hidden workload. So in higher ed, there's work, there's progress that shows up on your CV, and then there's work that no one ever sees. From y'all's purview, what does the invisible workload look like for faculty?
This. I think this is a big piece of it, and why I think this is so hard is because you have so many students, and if you're the one noticing that something's not going well, these conversations are hard. And if you're having this kind of conversation with multiple students multiple times a semester, it can be exhausting. And where do you write that on your performance review?
Yeah, and when you asked that, and I hope it's in the spirit of the podcast, because I think we're in a very the richness of our experiences and what we notice more than the research. I'll say the joys of what brought us to higher ed, the passion we have for maybe something we want to teach, something we want to research. And then once you're part of a community, this idea of service work and of being involved in things and supporting each other, it can really add up to a workload that, I think can easily lose sight of boundaries and what that is, and lose sight of what am I required to do versus what I enjoy doing on some level. It's tricky.
I want to double click on that. So boundaries. Mm-hmm. Say more.
Well, boundaries, I say it's tricky because, and something that, when I've encountered reading about burnout, I think there are two ways you could think about it in simplistic way. It's a personal responsibility. I have to keep my own boundaries, right? So those are the kind of things like I'm not going to check my emails on the weekend, or I'm going to set a policy with people of how I view emails with my students, with my colleagues. Like I'm personally responsible for boundaries. But I think there's also, and this is any place, again, the institution and what kind of boundaries are normed in the workplace culture, which is a different story. And, that could be on a department level, a college level, a university level. If it's the culture is we do a lot of service and we meet all the time and we serve on this many committees and we do external service too, that kind of permeates, and that expectation can permeate, especially if there's no one around. I'm thinking of our junior faculty. There's no one around to really talk about the aspirational versus the reality and what could ultimately be work-life balance. So I kind of see it from those two ways. What am I personally responsible for in terms of boundaries? I think people think in those terms, but I think we should also think in terms of like what kind of community do we want? What kind of institution do we want? What kind of institutional norms and rules and protocols do we want in place, or do we endorse? And the we is very broad here.
Yeah.
That actually promote well-being, and I would argue promote, all those more effective outcomes and everything else.
I think we talk a lot about boundaries, and we don't always talk about how to set boundaries. So I think the first step I usually talk about with students when I'm teaching this is, do you know what your boundaries are? And a lot of us don't take the time to stop and think about it. So a really easy example I find is, are you someone who's always 15 minutes early? Or are you someone who's always 5 minutes late? And right there, we know a lot about your time boundaries. And again, sort of thinking about it culturally, North America is very big on really rigid time boundaries. We expect people to be on time. So there's sort of this bias towards the person who's always 15 minutes early. But if we look at other places in the world, like people have very flexible time boundaries, and that's okay. So it's not that one boundary is good and the other boundary is bad. It's just that when we have someone who's always late and someone who's always early in a group together, that's when we run into conflict. So if I can identify I'm somebody who's always 5 minutes late and communicate that, or if it's really important for me that you really must be on time, and again, communicate that. So we can set our boundaries up front and then stick to our boundaries. Because again, I hear so often like, I don't want to be mean, or I don't want to make the person mad. And I'm going to lean back on Brené Brown again. She talks about how the most compassionate people she has studied are the most boundaried. Like setting boundaries lets people know what to expect. It makes you predictable in a way that makes you safe. So by setting healthy boundaries and sticking to your boundaries, you're actually being more compassionate because you're, letting people know what to expect from you and then maintaining that, as opposed to having flexible boundaries and then ending up being really mad at someone all of a sudden and they don't understand why. I also think so many of us have not had healthy boundaries modeled for us. So being able to model healthy boundaries for our peers, for our students, is really a beneficial thing.
So Brené Brown's ears are just ringing about right now, because I'm going to also say a quote. So Brené Brown says, to be clear is to be kind, or to be kind is to be clear. Yeah. I'm not sure in which order, but you get the sentiment. And I think that's really important. I also think understanding your values and how they align with your boundaries And I say this because I never interrogated my boundaries until my wife had said, hey, you know how sometimes you respond within like 2 minutes to a student's email when they email you at like 8:57 p.m.? Is that going to like change? And I said, yeah, I might have to tell them I'm not going to respond. And it was as simple as that. It was as simple as, hey, Eric, are you going to like set some boundaries for email? And what's amazing is the email stopped, or they became much, much less because I said, yeah, hey, apparently I have no life and I just want to email you right back. So I'm going to have one and I'm not going to email you back until the next day if you email me after 5. And that it's miraculously cleaned up 90% of off business hours emails, which is amazing. And even at that, if I have a free moment and I check my email, I don't have to respond and I can do the schedule send, which is also helpful for modeling boundaries. I've learned that. I also think for junior faculty, particularly, as I'm just transitioning out of being a junior faculty, it's really hard to set boundaries because you're trying to prove yourself and you're trying to get, if you're on the tenure track, you're trying to get tenure. If you're not, you're still trying to prove. So you're constantly proving or trying to prove yourself, and it becomes exhausting because you think you have to say yes to everything. Because I legitimately thought I didn't really know you could say no. I really didn't understand that you didn't have to. And this isn't a reflection of my department. This was just a thing that I had never interrogated, and I really never asked anybody about it. And Joe, you said doing the service that you enjoy doing. I think that's a boundary. I think that's one that I used to think like I have to say yes to no, I'm going to say yes to the ones that fill my cup up, and the ones that take stuff out of my cup. Like I'm doing less of that stuff. There can virtually never be zero of that, but there's going to be less of that. Thoughts on that?
Well, that's the tricky part though, Eric, because the ones that fill our cups up still take something.
Yes.
It's saying no to the things you really want to do. That's really hard.
Because those spaces in our calendars, I think that's one of the biggest things that pops in my mind is watching my calendar fill up. And it's with things that on their own, I would be genuinely excited about. But when we put them all together for a week, it feels untenable. And maybe it is. But then I do think, and again, I think it's tricky and messy because we can look at it from a personal responsibility standpoint. And I just don't think that's the only way to look at it. We have to look at the institution and what are those systemic issues around us that also promote and maybe encourage or maybe make it more appetizing or normal or typical to agree and do all of those things. So, the hope is that we have a workplace culture where we can talk about these things and talk about our experiences. Again, going back to my first thing, which I'm glad I led with, was the non-judgment. Where are those spaces?
I also think I'm going to add to the non-judgment is believing that people are doing the very best that they can instead of trying to interrogate your way around that they're not. And they are doing, that's legitimately believing that can be hard to do, particularly if you have not seen it that way before. And I would tell on myself and I'd say that's something I sometimes struggle with and I'm trying to get better at. Yeah. So speaking of the university calendar, emails don't stop. Students always need support, even in the summer. And faculty often feel burnout or compassion fatigue. How do we deal with that? And how do we resist the urge for urgency and to always be available and to just basically give up our own well-being for the sake of helping? Because we are in helping professions or caring professions, and who's caring for the carers?
I think a valuable act of service, one that I would and have added to my calendar, is mentorship. And I think I could make an argument that a model like mental health first aid can help create better mentorship and create more attunement to, they don't need my advice today. They need something else. And I'm here for it. And I do think the typical person that would want or volunteer to take on a mentorship role is game for that. It's in their typology to like, I am ready to engage in that kind of mental health oriented conversation. So, because I kind of see when we say the word burnout, and I think the literature will emphasize that burnout that's kind of like the ultimate outcome of if someone's experiencing burnout, it's fatigue to another level that could mean I'm moving on. I'm moving on from higher education.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Or I'm going to start not showing up. It's like that worsening signs we talked about, or the crisis level, which I think that is really disheartening when people leave the profession, leave higher education altogether, because that's the burnout is sort of, in that sense, the final destination. Whereas I think things we've been talking about, like invisible workload, compassion fatigue, overloading, all those sorts of things are kind of the elements, or could be part of that person's journey and experience that lead to that sort of burnout.
Yeah, and I would say two big things that always come to mind when I talk about burnout are the self-awareness piece and really thinking through, what is the story I'm telling myself? I know for myself, one of the things that's been really helpful, because one of the signs of burnout is often you go from being like, I can take on the world, I can do this, I'm so excited about this, to why is it always my responsibility? And you kind of get into this point where it feels like everyone's just dumping on you. And checking that story and saying, can I ask for help? Like, have I asked for help? Have I said no? Have I set healthy boundaries? Because also boundaries can change, right? We don't always know where our boundaries are, or our life circumstances change, because all of us have experiences outside of higher education. We have families, we have friends, we have, other responsibilities that if those are changing, sometimes that shifts our capacity at work. And really recognizing that we need to be responsive. And I mean, this is where, again, that twofold systemic piece is I have to take responsibility for explaining my boundaries and for letting people know, like, at this point, I don't have capacity for this anymore because of what's going on in my personal life, or because I've taken on this other role that I was asked to do, and that's limited my capacity over here. I need to communicate that. And I also need a responsive person to hear that. Mm-hmm. So I think that's where it gets a little trickier, is we can control what we're able to do. But it's a little harder to control how someone responds to that. And that's where I think the community that Joe's talking about, the mentorship piece, is like supporting each other in normalizing being able to voice to whoever we need to voice it to that my capacity has changed and I need support in shifting my workload. We need a system that's going to hear that.
Mentorship is something, if I had one word to describe my role, it'd be mentor to my students, to other people. Like that is the word that I think I've been training for however long. I think mentorship is something that it can be formal, it can be very informal, but I think it's when you identify something in someone else and you want to learn about it, whether that's a topic or how to lead or how to have better mental health first aid skills. Mm-hmm. I think it's so powerful. And I think you're spot on, Joe, with I do think mentorship helps create that caring environment. In fact, I had a mentor through the CFI Faculty Mentorship Program who told me that it was okay to mow my lawn during regular work hours because I come from a very working class background, and that was not to be done. Like, as I grew up, like, no. But then, okay, if it's 3:00 and I'm not teaching a class and I don't have another responsibility, like, you can go ahead and mow your lawn there, Eric. Like, it's okay. But one of my mentors had to give me permission to do that, and has to model the way, because you don't know what the way is unless most of the time, at least for me, it's always helpful to have it modeled. Mm-hmm. So, and then what is the story that I'm telling myself or I'm making up? Because oftentimes I make up stories. And I find it helpful to demand evidence of that story. Like, okay, Eric, what evidence, tangible evidence do you actually have that says that story is true? Sometimes it might be true. The majority of the time, I'm just making it up. It's just my mind. The thing between my two ears is just making up something, and it's making me feel bad or making me whatever. And if I interrogate it with evidence, it usually falls apart. It's a straw man argument, if you will.
And I think, too, to pay attention to what are the stories society is telling us. Because I think like hustle culture is still very much a thing. Mm-hmm. And this idea that being stressed is almost like a badge of honor. Mm. And we buy into that story more than I think we should. If we're able to push back against that narrative, where if someone comes to me and is like, oh, I only got 2 hours of sleep last night and I have all these things to do, that's not something we want to be proud of. We want to, say, hey, that sucks. I got 8 hours of sleep last night and it was great. Right? Let's normalize self-care instead of treating it as this thing that no one is able to attain.
Right.
Like, we can own it, and that's good.
This isn't just about helping faculty feel better, though that matters. There are ripple effects. So why is caring for faculty a necessary part of caring for students?
Can we go back to the Alex case real quick?
Sure.
Because I actually see an avenue.
Absolutely.
Because one thing that's been sitting with me is like, I also want to share with what we do in Alex's
Absolutely.
case. So there's a module that's kind of infamous in our training. It's module 6, which is all about how to handle crises. So, and what it does is really translate the ALGEE model into, okay, here's a flow chart and a series of questions and how you'd approach and then handle a crisis like suicide. Mm-hmm. And given the kind of things Alex is answering here alone and then what might follow might mean and hopefully ALGEE and its nature would help you get to this point really quickly. But we have an emergency situation. We want to walk together to the counseling center, or maybe we want to call an emergency service or have Alex call the suicide hotline. There's a lot of resources and opportunities there. But just that emphasis of in a crisis and our assessment through ALGEE, we're at a pace and a response that is looking to keep Alex safe for now. What can we do to keep Alex safe? So with all that said, I mean, imagine you have an Alex in your class.
Yeah.
What would it mean if you were to actually, and I could go so far as to say save their life, but what would it mean to you and your students to see someone receive help like that? What does that say for your class environment? What does that say for the kind of the classroom, the semester that you're seeking to create? I think there's an argument I lean into, and I'm happy to talk to anybody about around this kind of work. Actually, you're not only helping the individual, but you're helping the system, and you're helping your microsystem too. That is your classroom, and if you can do that, learning's going to happen at a better rate. So to extend it to faculty and really any kind of little ecosystem we have on campus, if we're doing these kind of things, and actually whether it's what we were talking about with boundaries or even advocacy for, let's talk about these issues better as a department, as a college, as a university. If we're doing these kind of things, I'm pretty sure our work outcomes and all those tangible metrics will improve as well.
Yeah, I always think everyone's heard the, don't put someone else's oxygen mask on before you put your own on. That's kind of a tired metaphor, but it's a very true metaphor. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where, technically my role, I'm here to help students. Like, the counseling center is student-focused, student-facing. But I love doing things with CFI. I was so excited when Joe reached out because helping faculty is helping students, right? Making sure we have healthy faculty who can set healthy boundaries, model healthy boundaries, who can, manage burnout. You're modeling all of those skills for your students. right? We're creating this healthy environment. So I always think back to the Okanagan Charter that we've signed and JMU is on board with. And, when something is happening, you don't, I think it's a frog is the analogy that they use. But if a frog is sick, you don't look at the frog, you look at the pond. What is our broader environment? What are the systems that are in place that are causing faculty burnout, that is making it so they don't have capacity to support our students? It is a broader system, and we have to take care of the health of the entire system to make sure it's a good place for our students, right? So that we can have a good place for our faculty. So it's a place that we all want to be and all want to show up. So definitely, I think you can't separate faculty well-being from student well-being because we are all in the same system.
That sounds like a wonderful place to end it. Thank you so much, Karla. Thank you so much, Joe.
Thank you, Eric.
Yeah, thanks, Eric.
That's it for today's episode of the CFI Faculty Lounge Podcast. A big thank you to our guests, the CFI Ops team, Sarah Rush, Leah Chapin, and most importantly, you, our listeners. If you enjoyed this conversation, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with a colleague. To stay updated on new podcast episodes and other faculty development opportunities, click the link in the description to join our listserv. Thanks for listening, and tune in next time for more meaningful conversations about teaching and faculty life.